Hello, everyone. It's Stephen Whiteside here from the uptrend.com with this weekend's update for Sunday, October 12th, 2025. Well, we've been looking for sell signals for a while now, and it certainly rained sell signals on Friday. Now, we've been talking about, we should stop buying. We've been talking about that for a while. We also mentioned that, you need to reduce your stock market exposure. And last week we talked about the crash of 87 because we were expecting volatility to expand in the month of October. We've been waiting for that through the month of August, through the month of September, and then into the month of October, and we finally got volatility expansion on Friday. Now, the crash of 87 happened on a Monday. It was not a one-day event. The market was coming down into that Monday. And so there was weakness ahead of that day. The market just didn't fall out of the sky on one particular day. And the market was down over 22% on that day. That's not what happened on Friday at all. Now, typically a market rises nice and steady like an escalator and comes down like an elevator, and that's certainly what happened on Friday. The S&P is back to where it was back on September 11th of this year. So we've given up a whole month of gains for the S&P 500. Some of the indices a bit more, some a bit less than that, and we'll take a look at that in a few minutes. Now, on Friday, the Dow was down 1.86%. And then there's the iShares for the TSX 60 down 1.4%, and certainly not trading back into the levels that we saw at the start of September. We've just gone back a week or so. So no major damage to the TSX so far, even though we are back on a sell signal as of Friday's close. Now, looking at the fear index, and since July, we've been expecting the VIX to trend higher. And we had a few pops. We had a pop at the start of August, at the start of September, but no major trend higher for the VIX. And so here we came into the month of August. Here's what the daily chart looked like on Thursday. The VIX was trading in the channel. You can see the spike that we had at the end of July into August, and then at the end of August into September, we had a couple of spikes. But look what happened on Friday. Friday, the VIX moved up over 30% on the day, and it closed just below the high from back in July. Now, we are above the flypaper channel, so this is the time where we need to become bearish instead of bullish. And last week at this time, we were going to remain long-term bullish on the market as long as the VIX did not close above 1787. Well, guess what? We blew right through that. So now, of course, we've changed hats. We're going from long-term bullish to long-term bearish on the market, and will remain that way unless the VIX closes below 1505 this coming Friday. Now, in this weekend's presentation, I'm going to walk through the daily charts for the major index ETFs that we follow in this presentation. Starting off with the Vanguard Total Market ETF, you can see that that is certainly a major breakdown there, and we are certainly back on a sell signal. That's also true for the Dow Diamonds or for the Spider. For the S&P 500, you can see that we closed just below the lows from mid-September, and that takes us back to the September 11th area. And then if we continue lower from here, our next mathematical target is 625. Looking at the NASDAQ 100, we are holding those mid-September lows. Our next mathematical target to the downside is 562.50. Then looking at the Russell 2000, we're back on a sell signal for small caps, and back on a sell signal for micro caps, which are holding up very well at the moment. Quite an appetite for micro cap stocks on both sides of the border in the month of August and September. Looking at the energy sector, it plummeted on Friday, and no change in trend there, but we're back to where we're trading in the middle of August. Financial stocks and bank stocks are back trading where they were back when this rally started at the start of August. So quite a loss for financials and bank stocks. Gold stocks still holding up. We saw a lot of sell signals in the gold and silver sector on Thursday. The GDX held up. It is still on a buy signal and then was up slightly on Friday, so no change in trend there. Semiconductors came down hard on Friday, down 5.76%. That's not too bad. Semiconductors are much more volatile than the rest of the stock market. On Friday morning, I pointed out that the major semiconductor ETFs were all up at resistance and stuck there, and then here we are coming down, and you can see our next targets to the downside. And you can see there's a nice open gap down here right below the 312.50 level that could certainly be a target to the downside. Now, semiconductors have a ways to go before the pros really give up control. Compare that to US bank stocks, and you can see the pros gave up control back in the middle of September. So, no shock there that we made a new low for this move on Friday. Now, moving on to the weekly charts, and when we look at our rankings, remember last week most of these were ranked at 10. Typically, when things start breaking down below 8, that's when you'll start to see sell signals. Gold the stocks are still holding up very well, semiconductors still holding up. Energy sector looks pretty weak here, so let's move through these charts. And of course, we've been talking about looking for the first close below the previous week's low. That is a warning signal by itself. So let's see if we see any of those. Looking at the Vanguard Total Market ETF, yes, we closed below the previous week's low. That is also true for the Dow, for the S&P 500, for the Nasdaq. It's also true for the Russell 2000, small caps, micro caps holding up very well. When we look at the Canadian market, you'll also see that that micro caps are holding up very well at the moment, and a lot of it has to do with a lot of the metals doing very well right now. It's not a lot to do with energy, but certainly has something to do with metals, including uranium. Those stocks are pretty hot at the moment. Now, there's the U.S. energy sector back on a weekly sell signal as of Friday's close. There's financials back on a sell signal. There's bank stocks back on a sell signal. But gold stocks, even though they were down slightly on the week, did not close below the previous week's low. That is also true for semiconductors. They were down 3.37% on the week after making a new high, did not close below the previous week's low. So the market's still in love with semiconductors. What worked this week? Well, the big winners were metals and mining and utilities. What didn't work? Well, first of all, the energy sector was hit hard, but home builders and U.S. retail stocks are back on weekly sell signals as of Friday's close. Now, moving on to the Canadian market, and it is coming from a stronger position than the U.S. market at the moment. But we are certainly back on sell signals for the iShares, for the TSX 60, for the Vanguard Canada ETF. For stocks outside of Canada, they were down 2.69% on the day. There is small cap stocks just on the edge of a new sell signal. The Venture Exchange closing at the upper channel line, no change there. Unfortunately, the energy sector rolled over on Friday, so there's a lower high on Thursday and a lower low on Friday. That is certainly a bearish pattern for the Canadian energy sector. Financials back on a sell signal, bank stocks back on a sell signal. We've got gold stocks, which generated a sell signal on Thursday. We're up slightly on Friday, so no change in trend there. Big reversal day for the tech sector, but not enough to give us a sell signal. Then moving on to the weekly charts, and these numbers look better than the U.S. market. We still have a few tens, and we certainly have some weakness in the energy sector, but that is the only real area of weakness right now. There's the iShares for the TSX 60, did not close below the previous week's low. That is also true for the Vanguard Canada ETF. Not true for the iShares World ETF. And then we've got small cap stocks making a new high. We were trying to hit 29.69, got as high as 29.58 before pulling back. That gave us a bearish reversal week, but certainly we did not close below the previous week's low. And so that is still a bullish sign. There's a big reversal week for the Venture Exchange, hitting 1,000 and then pulling back, closing still above the high of the previous week. So that is still very bullish for the Venture Exchange. And what's that? Up probably 45% on the year, I think. Looking at the energy stocks, it pulled back and closing in the channel, closing below the previous week's low. There is the financials closing slightly below the previous week's low. Bank stocks closing at the previous week's low. No major breakdowns here. There's the gold ETF not closing below the previous week's low. Then we've got the infotech sector, a big reversal, but no change in trend on the weekly chart. What worked? Well, it was Canadian utilities were the big winners, followed by the base metals. What didn't work? Well, it was REITs are back on a weekly sell signal as of Friday's close, and then a big reversal week for the Canadian marijuana sector, down 2.62%. So no major loss there, closing at the previous week's low. So not a major breakdown for the Canadian marijuana sector. Okay, folks, that is all for today's presentation. Friday was a big down day for the market. We've been expecting volatility to expand for some time. It expanded on Friday, kind of a shock to everybody. It started in the middle of the day. We'll have to see what kind of fall through we get to the downside. If you're trading the market, whole bunch of weekly sell signals on Friday across the board, pretty well every sector of the market. So you should be putting in some sell orders on Monday. If you're a long-term investor and you've cut back on your stock exposures over the last month or so, then not really much to do for the time being. We need more evidence that a long-term trend change is starting. Friday was a one-day event. That doesn't mean the trends have changed on a long-term basis, and we need to sit back and sit on our hands and wait and see how things progress going forward. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. If you're north of the border, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. The markets are closed tomorrow in Canada. They are open in the US. I'll be back in the morning to do a pre-market video, and then we'll be back in the afternoon to update our chart database with whatever happened in the US market on Monday. Again, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Next time you'll hear my voice is on Monday morning.